بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to all of you. It is an honor to hold space with you in a difficult time. And, I think the most important reminder that we can say right off the bat is coming together in times like this is the most important healing mechanism, and it is the most important way in which we preserve our resilience and, inshallah, preserve our resolve in the advocacy work that we must do. Every single one of us has a responsibility, and that responsibility looks differently depending on the situation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has planted us in. And so, with that, inshallah, we hope to share a few reflections. Before I begin, I want to say the following reflections are my own reflections. They are ways in which I myself have tried to answer this question. They're not exhaustive. They may not even be fully universal, but they are ways in which I have tried my best. And, I failed many times to navigate what does feel like a world on fire, what does feel like perpetual difficulty, which does feel like perpetual ibtila and trials and afflictions that occur in our own personal lives and in the ummah. And so, how do we balance that? So, with that, inshallah, we begin in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. And praise and blessings upon a noble messenger Muhammad and his honorable family and his blessed companions. May God be pleased with all of them, and upon all messengers and prophets that came before us and before him as guides to humanity, giving us clarity, especially in times of difficulty, and what to do in times of ease, because there's a test in both. There's tests in difficulty and there's tests in ease. And so I think that's a good place to start, which is often we look at difficulty and we develop the wrong mentality, which is that these difficulties themselves are the worst thing that could happen. When in reality, the majority of those who we call against, the tyrants and the oppressors of the world, the test they failed was not the test of affliction. The test they failed was the test of privilege. They failed the test of being given power, and instead of using that for God, instead of using that in ways to bring about peace, instead of using that in ways to establish harmony for all peoples, instead they use that for their own vanity. They use that for their own greed. They use that to subjugate others. And so I think the first step is to remember, because inshallah, we want to talk about faith, action, and unity. Faith, action, and unity. And so right now, we're just going to begin by talking about faith. Faith begins by remembering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God Himself, who brings about these afflictions, these are tests in order for us to actually grow in that which we are meant to aspire to. And it is actually the test of privilege that many a times is the hardest, not affliction. Because there are, through affliction, we learn wisdom, we learn lessons, we grow, right? And so, I wanted to, inshallah, preface it by saying that. And today, I went to the khutbah, and the wonderful Imam, you know, interestingly, subhanAllah, his topic was on the various forms of despair and hopelessness, through a Quranic lens. Like, what's the difference between, qunut, and the difference between that and yes, like hardship of the heart, or, complete despair. And one of the things that I really appreciated was that he began his sermon by remembering our Uncle Khalid, rahmatullah alayh, ruh al-ruh, the person that inspired the world, from Gaza, who, has been experiencing a genocide by the Israeli occupation of him and his people. and his granddaughter passes away, and that is the most valuable thing of his in the dunya. And we all saw the image. He picks up his granddaughter and he kisses her, right? And you could see something that I feel a lot have never seen before, which is the smile of Iman, the smile of Rida Billah, the smile of just complete submission, complete faith, complete reliance, complete contentment with God's decree. And he kisses her, right? And many like him, in Gaza, have taught us this lesson of faith, which is despite the difficulty and uncertainty, we maintain our trust in Allah. And so when we talk about faith, I think it is essential for us to remember, or at least understand, if we don't, what is faith? What is faith? If we expect everything in life to go exactly our way at all times, what is faith then? Faith, and true faith that was modeled by Uncle Khalid, rahmatullahi alayh, and upon all the shuhada of Gaza. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala liberate them beyond just a ceasefire, but liberate them from the occupation. And inshallah, we all rejoice together in a free Palestine. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Uncle Khalid teaches us that Iman, faith, is inner security in the face of uncertainty, rooted in a reliance upon Allah. Okay, it is not that there isn't uncertainty until we have faith. No. The entire purpose of faith, which we saw modeled, that inspired the world, by our brothers and sisters of Gaza, that faith is what we experience in the face of uncertainty, which a lot of us are experiencing right now. Some of us have family members who are afflicted in, the California fires. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring them respite and healing and relief. I have family that lives in SoCal, so it's a very disorienting reality. I'm Syrian. All of these are disorienting realities that are uncertain. We don't know what the future will hold, and that makes us anxious. Iman, the word Iman, faith, literally is from Aman, which is security. And that inner security in the face of uncertainty, that's Iman. That's what it means to have faith. Because it's rooted in what? It's rooted in reliance upon God. It's rooted in the best opinion possible you can have of God. And part of that opinion is to believe that God is capable of all things, including relieving our brothers and sisters in Gaza, including continuing to bless our brothers and sisters in Syria, including aiding our brothers and sisters in Sudan towards, inshallah, a new triumph and a new age for that blessed land. We believe it is hope that is the evidence for this faith, and it is despair that shows us our faith needs work. It is hopelessness that shows us our faith needs work. And, part of that hope, it begins really with never making conclusions that limit God's power. That we never make conclusions about the all-powerful in ways that limit that based on our own insecurities and anxieties. Who would have thought Syria would be in the situation it's in now? I mean, do you understand that? I forget the author's name. He wrote The Anatomy of Revolution. Essentially, this author, which it's one perspective. He argues that no revolutions ever succeeded, right? Like Harb al-Mustad'afin. No actual revolution long term succeeds. That's his argument. That's his perspective, right? And that is a pretty dominant perspective in people that look at revolutions by the oppressed. And yet, look what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed the entire world, including this author in Syria. No one would have imagined, no one would have even thought that this regime in Syria would fall, much less being replaced by, the moment it fell, words like, today is a day of mercy and forgiveness. Today is a day of mercy and forgiveness. On the day that regime fell. I mean, no one would have imagined reality. Now, is there still uncertainty? Yes, that's why we still have Iman. And that's why we always need Iman. That's why we always need faith. But faith and hope are inextricably linked. Because hope means Allah is capable of all things. Why do I limit Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power? That doesn't mean we are unintelligent or unwise or naive, right? It means that we believe in the capacity of God to do miracles on earth. That's what it means to have Iman. And we're seeing miracles before us, right? Many wouldn't even believe that something like a ceasefire would have happened just, a day ago or 2 days ago. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to show us signs that the ummah is in the care of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is in the care of God. And so Iman isn't that there isn't uncertainty. No, having faith is looking uncertainty dead in the eye, just like Uncle Khalid, rahmatullah alayh, and being able to maintain an internal security, an internal certainty in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's promise. Now, a lot of that is impossible if you don't believe in God and the Akhirah. I personally believe that, and I know this because I struggle through it. A lot of our inability to believe these things, beyond just like a mental attitude, comes from the fact that we forget that dunya is not all there is. And, looking at our brothers and sisters in Gaza, they've reminded us of that every single day. I think it's very hard for many people who don't believe in God to look at a mother following the funeral procession of her young son who was just murdered in Israeli airstrike, saying, "Oh Allah, take our martyrs, so long as you are pleased with us." Because they believe in the Akhirah. They believe in paradise. Most importantly, they believe in an all-merciful, all-just Lord that is holding the record for every single thing that happens. Nature itself testifies against the evil one. Nature itself on the day of judgment will speak. From the trees to the animals, they will speak and say, "This person harmed me. This person did not take care of me." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on the day of judgment, everything will be settled. But a lot of our maybe despair and hopelessness comes from thinking that I want it settled now in the way that I want it. But that's not what we're seeing from our brothers and sisters in Gaza. We're seeing sabr. We're seeing rida biqadarillah, contentment in the face of unbelievable suffering, right? And so that is what it means to have faith. Now, because we only have 10 minutes, I don't want this to be overly theoretical. So just as a practical point, faith is a muscle that has to be flexed so that it goes beyond kind of these beliefs and attitudes and just like intellectual ideas that we have. Okay, yes, we believe Allah is all powerful. Got it. We believe that uncertainty is inevitable and relying upon God helps us build internal security. Got it. We believe that because Allah is the all powerful, we have the best opinion of Him in making miracles happen. Got it. We believe all these things. But see, believing them here is not the same thing as flexing them in the heart. What do we do to flex this in the heart? What is it? How can our faith be unleashed in times like this? Well, very, very simple. And it's so simple that you might think, really? But I urge you, as I say these two things, to reflect on how much you were doing them. Number one, dua every single day for all of our brothers and sisters who are struggling, including those who were afflicted by the California fires. We're Muslims. We have moral consistency. And it doesn't mean like all suffering is relative. That's not what we're saying. But what we are saying is when people are experiencing pain, we experience pain. What did the Prophet ﷺ teach us? That, the ummah, in its love and in its mercy and in its gentleness with one another is like one body, right? If one part of it aches, the entire body aches. Okay? So if one part of the ummah aches, the entire ummah aches. Okay? And so, having that moral consistency and saying every single day there's going to be a dua for our brothers and sisters who are struggling. But then number two is very important. You can't just process the anguish that you feel about people struggling by just making dua for them. There also has to be a second step, which is gratitude for what Allah has given you. That's how you escape the endless cycle of despairing survivor skills. That's how you escape it. You recognize that I actually didn't deserve the blessings that I have, but God gave them to me. Thank you, Allah, for giving them to me. Allow me to use them in service of those who have less and give those who have less. That's the combination. Now, maybe you said, I knew that this was going to be the practical steps. Okay. What I have seen, since October 7th, and even before that, is working as an imam. Even this becomes nothing more than a reminder because of something so simple that we just don't do, which is we don't schedule the flexing of these muscles. And so our salah becomes motions, and then we wonder why we feel anxious. Did you talk to Allah in your sujood? Did you pray for Gaza in your sujood of every salah? Did you remember them at least once every single day before you slept? Did you read maybe dua and nasiri before going to bed? Just because you wanted to remind yourself that, I owe it. The bare minimum that I owe to those who are struggling is a dua. And so what I urge you to do in practicing, these practical steps, there has to be scheduled into your day. You have to flex these muscles every single day. And I mentioned this before. It is not normal to see the amount of suffering that we see on a day-to-day basis. That's not normal. And to think that that's not going to have consequences on your mental, emotional, physical, holistic health is naivete. Like, of course that's going to have consequences, and the worst of which is despair and hopelessness, such that you develop an apathy and you forget the amount of blessings Allah has given you, and forget that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of the situation and can help those brothers and sisters whose suffering that you are witnessing and experiencing the vicarious suffering of them that has caused you to despair and apathy. Right? So that's Iman. Iman is recognizing that there are things that we do in the inevitable uncertainty that we face before us. And yes, there's a theological component, there's intellectual beliefs that we have, but those are flexed on day-to-day practice of dua for those who have less, for those who are struggling, and gratitude to Allah for blessing us despite not being deserving. There's nothing that I or you did to deserve the privilege that we have. And all Allah asks us is وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ, and proclaim the blessings of your Lord. Speak them, meaning thank Allah, say these blessings. How many have been cured of their sadness, their prolonged sadness, from simply writing in a journal the blessings that they have? And وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying this speaking or proclaiming of the blessings of God necessitates that you lift people up with that privilege, which brings us to action, because it's not enough, right? Even if at times all we can do is pray, there are other things that we also are entrusted with by God, and that is, what action do we take in all of these circumstances? Okay, there are three things that should always come to mind whenever you see ibtila, whenever you see fitna, whenever you see any of these things. This is like a step-by-step process. First, what is my individual responsibility? What do I have to wake up to? Tawbah. Immediately. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, makes it clear that when we see fitan, when we see trials and afflictions on earth, right? There has to be a reminder of individual responsibility. What have I contributed to this? What have I contributed to this? And turning back into tawbah. So all over the Quran and all over a hadith, you'll find that just saying istighfar is a means of increasing your rizq, is a means of warding off punishment. We mentioned this hadith before, I believe, where the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said that just one neighbor who lives righteously, one person who lives righteously, in that living righteously, in his constant turning back to Allah, recognizing his own individual responsibility, which doesn't stop, 200 of their neighbors are protected from affliction. We believe these things. And so it can't always be externalized. That's not how we sustain fights against oppression. No, there has to be an internalization of, I need to do better as an individual. I can't just look at the worst case scenario, like the evil tyrants of the world, and be like, oh yeah, I'm good. No, there's a tawbah you need to do. There's a tawbah I need to do. There are lifestyle changes and improvements that we need to make to honor, right, these reminders by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then secondly, immediately there has to be community engagement. We mentioned that in the beginning of the reminder. Like just coming together and having a space like this. Believe me, I know that what I'm saying right now, you've heard maybe a million times over. But I promise you, I know this for a fact, that many of you just sitting here in the presence, having space, I'm speaking about my own self. It is an ointment. It is a relief, right? And so engaging community, remembering that many of those in your own local community may be directly affected. How many how many how many Palestinians living in diaspora exist in our communities? How many Syrians living in diaspora exist in your communities? How many amongst the Sudanese living in diaspora exist in your communities? And not living in diaspora, just having to witness their people, of their ethnic homelands, right? Being in a state of complete fitna and affliction, right? So we engage the community. And then lastly, we follow the lead of experts in our advocacy. Okay, I really believe in this. I think it's a reminder that we've learned since October 7th, I think very well. But then Syria came along, and it seemed like we didn't learn that lesson at all, right? Which leads me to my final point around unity. Unity, in my opinion, is about returning to wisdom. That's what unity is about. Unity is not having different opinions. Unity is being wise in the way that we approach those opinions. Unity is recognizing that the human heart is more sacred than your geopolitical analyses. That preserving the human heart is more sacred than your, fancy, nuanced takes here and there. And so what is wisdom? We mentioned this before. فعل الذي ينبغي في الوقت الذي ينبغي على الشكل الذي ينبغي. Wisdom is doing that which is appropriate in the time that is appropriate, in the way, على الشكل, in the way that is appropriate. Okay? And so, one of the things that we learned in Syria is literally every Syrian in the world was celebrating the fall of the Assad regime, arguably the most barbaric, regime that we've ever seen in modern history, potentially. Right? We've seen hundreds of thousands in mass graves. Right? The minimum number is 115,000 in mass graves, tortured. Right? Ask any Syrian, every single one of them has been affected. My own father, my own family, everyone has been affected by this. And you see the Syrians rejoicing. You see them saying, Alhamdulillah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has rid this tyrant. But one of the things that I found so perplexing is that the world is on fire and Allah gives some respite. All these people come and be like, well, don't be happy. What are you celebrating? Oh, this is all just a CIA psyop. This is just going to be the worst thing that ever happened. This is what we call kufr ni'mah. This is what we call, being ungrateful for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings. And where wisdom kicks in is recognizing, look, those most affected need a moment of respite right now. They're rejoicing. They're saying alhamdulillah. Maybe my irrelevant voice in the privileged whatever place, especially as someone not directly affected, maybe I don't say something right now. Maybe my geopolitical take as a non-expert is irrelevant, and actually it is harmful because you're putting things out that are deeply insensitive, right? And that's just one example. We've seen this before. Following the lead of experts in advocacy is a way that we actually preserve unity. I don't, I don't know what is best in the liberation of Palestine. Not just because I'm not most directly affected. That's not my expertise. But I want to do something for Palestine. I want to do whatever I can for Palestine. Let me look to the experts. What is their messaging? What are they saying when the ceasefire happened? What were their words? What were their takes? What were they telling me to do? This is what we mean by return to wisdom. Unity is not having difference of opinion. Let the experts have their analyses, and let people engage in discussion. But knowing when to engage in discussion and how to engage in discussion is how we go from unity to disunity, right? And the things that Syrians, I can only speak on the Syrian experience because I'm Syrian. The things that we heard in just the first day and few days of the liberation of Syria were things that I could not believe Muslims were saying. Things that I could not really understand how a Muslim with dignity would use this opportunity and moment to say certain things like this, instead of just saying alhamdulillah, let me hold up, let me see what those directly most directly affected are saying, and how are they grieving. Many Syrians didn't even get a chance to collectively grieve. How many of us were not even allowed to speak about this tyrant because our family would be sent to the torture chambers? Do you know the level of trauma of living for years, many in unable to speak even? Do you know the amount of trauma of having members, lost for years, and then you hear, oh, the prisons have opened. Maybe I will go and be reunited with my family member. At moments like that, is that a moment where we sideline these emotions and sensitivities so that we say what we want to say? This is against the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and it contradicts unity, and it creates problems because it's a time of heightened emotion. That's not when you want to speak, especially when your voice at that moment wasn't asked for, right? And so we talk a lot about being voice for the voiceless, but part of that is also being wise and knowing when I'm going to take a step back and follow the lead. It's a very important lesson that we need to be reminded of in times like this, right? And I saw. I'm sorry. I have to speak openly and forgive me. I saw similar rhetoric with the California fires. Like maybe when you're hearing this, it's not the time to tell me how Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is punishing the people of Fisk. Is it a possibility that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala brings upon trials that may be punishments? Of course, it's a possibility. It's in the Quran. Yeah, but again, hikmah. How many Muslims and forget Muslims, how many innocent people would have been lost? Do you know how many prisoners are being paid $1 a day in modern slavery, right, to go put out those fires and risk their lives? Maybe have some level of sensitivity in your rhetoric. Maybe have some hikmah in your rhetoric. And that'll be a means of which we preserve unity, but also preserve our iman, right? Lest it be corrupted by our nafs, by our egos, that maybe takes the form of, this bravado faith, but in reality contradicts the faith that the Prophet ﷺ taught us to have. and actions that are supposed to be modeled by the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In addition, part of returning to wisdom, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold on to the rope of Allah together and do not, create division, okay? And do not be divided. Now, many of the commentators of the Quran express that that rope of Allah is the Quran. One of the things that I think personally would really benefit our community is like mass tafsir of Surah Hujurat, like at every mosque. Because Surah Hujurat teaches us what are some of the things that cause disunity, which is the plot of the very enemies and the very tyrants that we're engaging in action against. Right? They want us to be divided. They want us to hate each other. They want us to be insensitive. They want these things, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Hujurat, He gives us, and we don't have time to go through the tafsir, so this is why it's just my, reminder to you is go read Surah Hujurat in a time like this. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us? That one of the things, for example, is verifying information. Syria was liberated. No one verified anything. Just like, oh, this is what happened. This is what happened. No evidence. No nothing. Just here's my analysis. Right? This is not good. يعني maybe إذا جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا. Maybe verify your information. Who is bringing you this information? Right? Are they experts? Are they people whose voice matters in a situation like this? Are they voices of the actual those most affected? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, you want to preserve unity, you don't just spread everything that you hear. Right? That's just one piece of this amazing chapter of the Quran. Another piece is it turns us, whenever we're divided, go back to Allah and His Messenger. Go back to the wisdom and the lessons in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Make that your arbitrator. So it doesn't matter, right, how strongly we believe in a political aim or a political group. Our arbitrators, Allah and His Messenger. Return to that, so that you can preserve your unity as an ummah, right? And I hope these are reminders that are just read as things that I'm sure you are all doing. But again, these are reminders of things that we should practice better. Okay, so in summary, number one, having Iman is recognizing that uncertainty is the way that we practice Iman. That is literally what it means to have Iman, is staring at uncertainty. We're going to stare at uncertainty. And having certainty in Allah in the uncertainty of the dunya, that is having Iman. And that is evidenced by our hope, not limiting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power and mercy. And recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can transform me and can transform anything in the world. And He is the one that is in control, modeled, as we mentioned, by the example of Uncle Khalid, rahmatullah alayhi, and our brothers and sisters in Gaza and many parts around the world, right? We talked about action. Number one, having the individual responsibility centered immediately. I need to make tawbah. I need to get my act together. I need to improve my life. I can't keep abusing people around me. I can't keep neglecting my spiritual health. These are things, these fitan are reminders for us to dig deep and engage back within, right? Secondly, engaging the community and then following the lead of the experts when it comes to advocacy. And that advocacy work is going to look differently depending on the context that Allah has put us in. Some of us have a higher degree of responsibility than others. Some have platforms, some do not. Some are experts in, advocacy, others are not. Some are imams, some are mental health practitioners. Everyone has a particular role, and understanding that role of yours is one of the most important lessons in times like this. And then finally, preserving unity is a return to wisdom. Doing that which is appropriate in the time that's appropriate, in the way that is appropriate, not rushing in ways that may create more harm than actual good. And I as a final note, we mentioned that returning to Surah Hujurat as a grand framework for community and for unity in a time like this, inshallah, will benefit us greatly. That is my reminder to myself. These are some of the ways that I try to navigate this. I try not to rush to conclusions. I don't always succeed. None of us are always going to succeed. I try to every single night before I sleep, I make dua. I make dua for those who are pressed. I make dua for those who are struggling. And I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what He has given me. So that I remember no matter how bleak it looks, Allah still given me blessing. And as a conclusive note, a lot of us may find comfort in reflecting on Allah's knowledge. We don't really know the wisdom of these things. Whenever we question, why is this happening? What is my response? What I have found to be the greatest healing technique is looking at those most directly affected and seeing how they're responding. And that is why I am not the same person after October 7th, because I've witnessed a faith in our brothers and sisters in Gaza that I think a lot of us needed to see, and it transformed us. If our brothers and sisters in Gaza are saying Alhamdulillah despite those circumstances, then I need to develop the courage and the strength to say Alhamdulillah in my circumstances if I hope to continue advocating for them and all of our brothers and sisters who are struggling. هذا وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.